that Amy Lowell gave to the select board. It's a thing that's been around for a little bit, but it's a way to develop some financing. So, what is it? It's a special revenue fund, and it can be appropriated for maintenance, improvements, and investments to municipal wastewater and drinking water and stormwater infrastructure. The source of the revenue is a property tax surcharge of up to 3% that is assessed on each parcel of taxable real estate in the community. It is not subject to the levy limitations of Proposition 2.5. Town meeting appropriations required to spend from the fund, so we still would have to, go in every year and say, well, this is the project we want to spend the money. And it's set up similar to those of you that have worked around the Community Preservation Act funding. The money's collected, then it has to be agreed to go out. So, why are we asking the Select Board to consider this? It's to provide funding to implement wastewater management on projects that will improve water quality in the town's ponds and the estuaries, the outfall for treated wastewater account, additional phases of sewer expansion, future treatment facilities. So the annual debt service costs on our best sort of financial model that Amy's been putting together for a while now says that the cost for wastewater projects might average from $3 to $7 million per year from 20 to 30 to 2050. So in other words, as the outfall is coming online and we're putting in more sewers or adding other things, we're projecting $3 to $7 million per year. I think everybody's aware of the wastewater management plan, watershed management plans. So, up until now, the town has had the approach of funding wastewater projects via retiring debt. That means that, the time between projects has been not a couple of years, but has been several years. There are other demands on the town's funding resources, whether that's the police station, schools, and something needs to give someplace in order for us to come up with watershed plans and know that there is some viable mechanism that funds will be available on a continuing basis. So setting up a WIF will provide a consistent source of funding for the needed wastewater management projects and leave more funds available for other town priorities. How much revenue could be generated by a WIF? So in FY26, the base, the prior year levy limit was 119 and some numbers, 120, and then for 27, the number's now 124. Town can raise taxes by up to 2.5% under Proposition 2.5. That raises another $3 million. And new growth gets added in there. So, if you come down to the very bottom right-hand corner, if the WIF revenue was set up at 1%, that would generate $1.3 million, 2%, $2.5 million, and at 3%, $3.8 million. How do you establish a WIF? Town meeting would need to vote to accept the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 39M, which was enacted a few years back, and approve the amount of the wastewater infrastructure of up to 3%. Now, Mashpee is our neighbor, and Mashpee, I think 2 years ago, went through an exercise. They shuffled some monies around between a couple of other funds, and they adopted a 2%. And I had a chance to speak to one of the selectmen about that process. They said, people needed to understand what it was for, and how to work it. But a couple of times people have said, how's Mashpee affording to do the projects that they've sort of taken on? One of them is that they were an early adopter of the WIF approach. So I believe it requires a 2/3 vote. I don't have that fact in front of me, but I would imagine it would. And then you'd have to prove the WIF at the ballot. So similar to an override that we already have had to go through or funding for some projects. So Mashpee is at 2%, Sandwich is at 2%, Dennis is at 3%. Barnstable is probably a little bit ahead of us in looking at the whiff and moving it through their town government and getting accepted. So if anybody wants to get more background information on this, I'm looking at Ed because Ed likes to look things up. So I don't have a lot to offer in this because this was Amy's presentation, but it directly affects what we're doing. Plus, we get on TV, so I wanted to put it out there. I'm going to start at the far right-hand end first. No, Tom had his hand up.
Yeah. So, do you think it's appropriate already this evening to ask for our endorsement of this idea?
Oh, thank you. So Amy did this presentation.
He didn't prompt me to do that.
Amy did this presentation to the selectmen.
Right.
The selectmen said they were going to bring it up for discussion. I don't know if it's the next meeting or at a future meeting. Let me circle back with Amy.
Okay.
And find out the timetable for us to.
Because, it wouldn't be seen as piling on if,
No.
This is such a clear-cut thing with so many obvious advantages in terms of long-term planning and a bunch of other things that, but let's see what other people think.
Yeah, I didn't put it on the agenda as something for a vote. Kristen will make sure that it's on the next agenda for a vote. Stephen?
I agree with Tom on that, and I don't see any disadvantage to approving it early, unless this is some sort of political campaign thing where you have to hit the right part of the news cycle.
No, we've got costs coming our way for wastewater, watershed planning, and everything else.
And I think I understand all the numbers you presented. I have a question about the number you didn't present, and that's the spending side of it, the costs. If some sewer project costs, just to keep the math simple, say $100 million, and you were saying the debt, you can cover $3 million of debt service, what interest rate are you assuming for the debt? And, or is this one of these, is it zero? Is it one of these interest-free loans?
So we've been working within a financing model for a while now that says we get SRF loans at 0%. That seems to be in place. We've been getting roughly up 20% from the Cape and Island Fund towards project costs as well. So you don't have to spend the money in the year. So if we implement it over the next year.
Debt service is repaying capital.
Correct. So
for
just like the Cape and Island Fund collects a percentage on lodging, okay? And then they disperse that out to projects, which are just help to reduce the overall capital cost, the town of the project. This fund would operate in a similar fashion, that as revenue is collected in any given year, it goes in the fund. If there's more money in the pot, you can take out what you need. You have to go to town meeting and say, we've accumulated $8 million. We want to use 6 of it towards this project cost.
So if you did the 3% one, the $3 million one, let's say, keep the math simple. So you did 3.3 million, and it was a 30-year loan at 0%. You'd repay it in 30 years. You could handle a $100 million loan and repay it in 30 years.
You're commingling things a little bit, Steve,
Yeah.
okay? This money goes into a fund, and we would draw from that fund with approval of town meeting to reduce project costs that would have to go out and get borrowed. So the size of the SRF loan would come down. Hypothetically, there's $8 million in the fund, and we go to town meeting for 6 of that, leaving 2 in it. And the next project is $40 million. We would get 20% of that, or $8 million, from the Cape and Island funds. That $40 million project's now 32. We would use the 6 to now make it a 20, how's my math, $26 million project that would have to be borrowed from the SRF.
Okay.
I'm going to give that a shot.
Yep.
You mean you want to shoot me?
No, I said I'd give you a shot. I'm
okay.
here.
There is, a total assessed property value number for the town of Falmouth.
Correct.
Towns used to refer to it years ago as the grand list. I'm not sure what it's called now and then. But every year or every couple of years, they reassess,
Correct.
and the assessments go up and up and up. That increases the grand list, if that's the right term. So if you hold your percent of property tax per 100,000 the same, isn't your levy limit going up?
It will increase. It will increase from year to year. I just.
And I don't know how that factors into the town's budgeting process. I've been meaning to ask that of somebody that might know, maybe Selectman Brown knows, but I know the assessments go up dramatically. The house I have now is probably doubled in 5 years or 7 years in assessed value, so taxes go up proportionately. So the town is seeing an increase in taxable property and therefore total revenue every year. Does the town have the ability to only go up by 2.5% total levy? And how's that work? And perhaps Doug has been involved enough to explain
Want to
it.
step in?
He's volunteering.
I'm lucky enough to have asked that before. So the tax rate gets adjusted down as values go up, so the tax rate stays steady.
So the tax levy, as Steve's showing it up there, that's the amount of tax we can collect.
Yeah, if you have more construction in town, you have more property value, that adds to your revenue.
Right.
And that's figured into projected revenue growth at, I think, $900,000.
That's the new growth line up there.
Yeah.
So that doesn't, you can still, on top of that 900,000, for example, increase your total levy by 2.5%?
Yeah, that's built in, I think.
So the,
But you can't expect more revenue from the existing place, the existing structures, because the value goes up, because state law requires the assessor to then back the tax rate down to keep it steady so that people's tax stays the same. Seems odd, but that's the explanation I got.
but yet in my own personal situation, my tax bill has probably gone up by a couple of $1,000s in the last 5 to 7 years, and the property value has almost doubled.
That's because we vote for things like fire stations and stuff.
On overrides.
Temporary overrides that
Yeah.
we all agree to, makes our taxes go up, doesn't always necessarily reflect on the tax rate, because that's an add-on that's going to go away eventually.
Okay, so you're saying the assessor has to reduce the levy,
The rate,
the rate percentage of commensurately, so there's not an increase?
yeah, and I don't know if it's
Beyond-
100% accurate, or they just make a reasonable adjustment to try to accommodate. I'm not sure exactly the fine details of it, but that's...
So there is an
Right.
accommodation to reflect that the fact the assessed value has gone up, but you're not, if it doubled, your tax isn't going to double just because of that. It only will increase by the 2.5% maximum.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the top line here, which is the base or prior year levy limit,
Right.
that's sort of the magic number.
Yep. And the 2.5%
You know,
allowed.
So if they ran the town on $119 million one year, they can go up 2.5%.
Right, on that tax level.
But if the value of the property's gone up, the assessor's got to do the adjustment back to sort of maintain the base levy, with the exception of anything that we've done a short-term override on.
Okay, good, thank you. The only other comment I would make is I think it'd be premature to take a consensus vote even of the committee, because the details are still in flux. What number will we go to? I think until that is more firmed up, it'd be
think-
better to vote a
Yeah,
support of the
I would
vote.
offer that, we'll put it on the next agenda. We won't vote on the levy amount, but we'll vote on the support of the concept
Okay.
to be pursued.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not a detailed statement we'd make, it's a policy statement.
Yes, that we're
we think
in
this
favor of the policy,
Yeah.
the concept.
Given options for raising money to keep the wastewater.
Establish some
going.
continuity and
Right.
assured funding
Yeah.
source.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Kim?
So Kim Comart from the Falmouth Pond Coalition, Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee. I think it's a great idea. It's like was done in Mashpee. It would have been good to do it years ago. I guess I have just a question about the fairness issue. So if I am on septic, these funds are going to be for what was on the first slide, wastewater, drinking water, stormwater infrastructure. So we all benefit from drinking water. We're all going to get support for drinking water. So if I'm on septic, I'm not on sewer, are these funds going to be used for sewer? They can be used for sewer enhancement. That's not going to benefit me if I'm on septic, but I'm going to be taxed for it. Is that right? And stormwater infrastructure, if I'm on a private road, my storm drain won't be repaired or serviced by the town, but I'll be paying for people who live on public roads to have their storm drains serviced. Is that right?
I'm going to try to answer your question.
Please.
Okay?
Yeah.
You've narrowed in on a specific case here, okay? I don't have the Mass General law in front of me. Gate did give a link. I will take some time and go dig into it a little bit. I think there's some exercise here where once we have a watershed plan, and there's things in the watershed plan that the town is obligating themselves to, I'm assuming that that falls under the umbrella of what WIF money can be used for, okay? I don't know for a fact. I will look it up and determine for sure,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, let me just say one more thing, and that is that I've been spending a lot of time with the folks at DPW dealing with the storm drain issue, and there's acknowledgement that there's a massive gap between the capacity of DPW to service our 7,500 storm drains and their resources, their personnel and their trucks and
I'm
et
trying
cetera.
to keep you on topic, which is the WIF,
Yeah.
okay?
So, well, I'm just saying.
WIF is a good thing.
I'm just saying that, yeah, I'm saying.
Not whether or not the town's got the capacity to do any of this.
I am making a case for this, because I do think that the more the DPW has funding to service storm drains, there's a massive gap now. So the fact that this funds can be used for that purpose is a good thing. It won't benefit the 40% of people who live on private roads in town, unless something changes.
Anybody else in the audience with a question? Okay.
I think at least half the audience knows that we've spent at least 6 months trying to figure out some way that town could subsidize the purchase and installation of innovative septic systems. And it's such a natural fit with the philosophy of this plan that if it's not written in or already available, so I would think we're going to keep pressing forward with getting some kind of exemption or whatever that allow municipal funds to be spent on private property, specifically oriented towards IAs and whatever else might need to be done. So there would be that help. The stormwater issue I hadn't thought of at all, because we're on private roads and we pay to have our storm drains cleaned, but our basins are our catch basins. So yeah, I don't know what might play out there.
All right.
Steve? I would just say in response to that, folks that live on private roads, when you drive out of that private road, you're on the public roads. And the storm drains are very important for the safety of people driving on those. So everybody does benefit, maybe not directly to the drain in your front yard, but it's just like saying, well, I don't have any kids in school. Why should I pay taxes to put the kids in school? Or, you know, the whole sewer issue of protecting the estuaries. Everybody benefits from the town's general infrastructure and activities we have, like schools and senior centers. Hey, I'm not a senior. Why should I support a senior center? You all benefit for it, if not now, eventually, or you use those roads, or you want those kids in those schools. So I hear you, but I think you got to look at the global issue.
Kristen, how do I get to my next presentation? Do I click close someplace? Yeah. Back. Bingo. Terrific. All right, second item on our agenda tonight is the environmental notification form submitted. And we got back a secretary's certificate. Copies have been distributed to the board members, and copies, it can be found on the town's, on the Water Quality Management Committee website. So a little bit of background for those watching and listening. The MEPA, Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act, environmental notification form, and the EIR, Environmental Impact Report process. The Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, MEPA, requires the filing of an environmental notification form for project or projects that potentially can impact the environment. The Outfall project clearly fell under the purview that an ENF was required. The ENF was prepared over the last year, included a lot of information from the different studies we've been doing, looking at fisheries, looking at,
This is for the outfall.
huh? For the outfall.
For the
Yes,
outfall.
this is all for the outfall, yep. And that ENF was prepared and submitted in early September of this year. And the timeline was that comments needed to come back within a time certain. We extended it by a couple of weeks to allow a couple state agencies to get more complete comments in. A total of 15 comment letters were submitted. That's not a very large number given the scale of this project. In the early part of the Secretary's certificate, which was issued on October 31st, they called out the fact that the town for the last 2 years has been working closely with a lot of the agencies, making sure the scope of things like the way we were doing borings, the way we've been measuring, different things in the water quality were consistent with the fisheries folks and stuff like that. And the certificate was issued on October 31st, and it affirms that the project will require the preparation of a draft environmental impact report, a DEIR. And so it's not a huge lengthy document, but it goes into a fair amount of detail by categories. And the draft EIR is supposed to respond to issues raised in the certificate, as well as to address issues raised by the comment letters. Ideally, if we do a good job with the draft EIR, it answers all the issues, and the final EIR certificate is issued. Sometimes projects, after the draft EIR in, they decide that you've got to go back and do some more. But I think we're on a good path with what we know and what we're being asked to do to get through this. Okay, I got a group of slides, and I've got them as elements that additional information is requested that are in the draft EIR. And I picked and chose a little bit of them. There's a lot more things in there that they ask for, but some of them are relatively clean and straightforward, and some of them, I think the members of this committee should have an understanding of what we're being asked to do. So, there needs to be a full description of public health standards governing the ocean discharge should be provided. That's a quote right out of the document. We in the ENF we didn't sort of list all of the public health standards that are applicable to a project like this. That information has to clearly demonstrate that the project will avoid, minimize, and mitigate damage to the environment and this is a key phrase here, maximum extent practicable through project alternatives and design. So it's not an absolute, but you need to identify everything. You need to look at it and whatnot. The other one in there says the draft environmental impact report should document the status of Kite Park and any other land along the pipeline route with respect to Article 97. Article 97 is an article in the state constitution that says land taken for conservation purposes can't be used. You can't put structures onto that land without going back to the legislature for a special act. We believe that because the pipe will be under Kite Park, and there'll be no structure that surfaces in Kite Park, that we meet the sort of the allowable standard for that, but we need to document that better in the draft EIR moving forward. Elements continued. The draft EIR should include additional details about how the project will help the town to achieve TMDLs, and should discuss what changes will be made to the plans for implementation of nitrogen-reducing measures outlined in the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan, targeted wastewater management plan. So one of the things that the state decided, since we have a comprehensive wastewater management plan and a targeted wastewater management plan, which is sewering those areas south of Route 28, they have basically assigned what we're doing the same number as that. So we are, in fact, going down a path of amending our current comprehensive wastewater management plan rather than, getting approval for a whole new plan, which is, it's a procedural issue, but it's in there. Then the DEIR should provide additional information regarding the extent to which future sewering will primarily serve existing developed areas, and there's some other stuff about not building on barrier beaches and stuff. And the reason I pulled this out is the whole issue of getting watershed plans done and getting the outfall, where there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg here thing. If we don't get an outfall permitted, it's a different amount of sewering that's going to happen. If we do get an outfall approved, there may be some more sewering that will happen, but they wanted some assurances that we're not sewering areas that would, harm the environment by, encouraging development. And then another one is the no-build alternative, which says we don't do anything, we don't build the outfall. It needs to be recalibrated to determine the anticipated effect of the town's actions, assuming full implementation of the strategies within the outfall alternatives. So they're sort of making us do a better case of documenting if we don't get an outfall, what happens. Elements continued. The draft environmental impact report should provide plans of conditions along the proposed pipeline route, as well as in Kite Park, and additional details about the design of the outfall and the diffuser system. And then, as requested by Mass DEP, it should include an analysis of alternative materials and construction techniques that are planned for the discharge main to demonstrate that the most robust, reliable design has been selected. No heartburn on my part of that, but they do want to see a better documentation that, we're not taking the cheapest option, we're taking the best option. So there are a couple of comments around the wastewater treatment facility. The DER, the draft environmental impact report, should describe any changes to the wastewater treatment facility that will be necessary to treat wastewater flows of 3 MGD. Again, this is a reasonable request on their part, because currently with the work we're doing now, we never could treat 3. We're going to have to, if we bump up towards the 3 number, we're going to have to do more work at the wastewater plant. And that's a reasonable request to outline what that looks like and when that might be needed. The draft EIR should discuss whether the town intends to reserve some sewering with groundwater discharge in the comprehensive wastewater management plan, or direct all planned discharges to the ocean outfall. I think this item will have some internal discussion, maybe some public discussion over how much of a fallback or a safety net do we want to maintain, or do we want to completely get rid of all the groundwater discharge? So it's a reasonable, again, my opinion, it's a reasonable question for them to ask and see some level of commitment as to what we are or aren't going to do. Then there's some comments relative to what they call public health. We should review the potential public health risks that will be remediated by the removal of excess nitrogen in groundwater and surface waters. So they're looking for a summary of what the good news is if we knock down nitrogen in the estuaries. There is a thing called the anti-degradation requirements, which we've been working on for the better part of the last year, which is what's the quality of the water that we will discharge out to the outfall versus what the quality of the water in Nantucket Sound. And fit inside what's called a Class A water, and that we're not changing anything by anything approaching 10%. And all the initial work on that is generally positive. Over the last year, we've sampled at the effluent for, I'll say, I don't know if you got the number on the top of your head, Kristen, but it's like 40 or 50 different compounds, gathered information on it, and then we sampled out in the sound, in the sound as well. And that analysis was not finished at the time we submitted the E&F, and we expected the anti-degradation comment to come up. So it's not a surprise, but there's still work to be done there. And then the environmental impact report should discuss public health risks associated with spills or leakages in proposed infrastructure. It's a little bit of boilerplate, but it's also something that, we owe the town and everybody how this will run, and, what's the approach if there's an issue. Then under construction, we need to provide additional details about the HDD stands for horizontal directional drilling, including whether any drilling fluid such as bentonite slurry will be used. And the issue there is that if it's not properly designed and engineered, the bentonite slurry that typically gets used can pop out. For those of us that follow what went on with the Eversource directional drilling, they did not have any breakout. We've got good soils, but again, we need to document, probably provide them calculations showing how that will not happen. We need to describe the area of Kite Park that will be used for the horizontal directional drilling operations and the duration of construction activities. Reasonable request, and it's information we can put together fairly quickly. And then the draft EIR should provide details about the exact design of the outfall. For example, the number and angle of diffuser ports, the height of the seafloor, the final location relative to the deep water edge of eelgrass. And that's what I have. So one of the reasons I want to put this in front of you all and walk through some of these things is we are going to town meeting on Monday night. We are asking for additional funding. A big component of that additional funding is to fulfill the requirements for the draft EIR, but more importantly, we actually need to sort of design the outfall in order to respond to the draft EIR, and we've factored that in to the monies we're requesting. So we're calling it a 30% design. We're not going to do an awful lot about the route of the pipeline going back up to the town, but we're in essence going to prepare plans that are ready for submitting to Army Corps of Engineers and others for permitting that will show, the nature and the extent of the diffuser and everything else. So I'll try to answer questions. I don't know if others of you have read it and think there's something that jumps out at you that's important or whatnot. Ed?
I've gone through it a couple of times. One thing, just based on the highlights you gave, Steve, my understanding was the effluent now is testing at about that 3 milligram per liter level.
We consistently are 3 or slightly less.
Not 100%, but pretty close. So I would think that's a good long way towards, okay, here's where we are, here's what we've done in the past couple of years to get to that level, and here's the actual data. And if more SBRs or something has to be added to get it more consistent, then that would be
right.
That. So that seems like it'd be a pretty straightforward thing to address.
Let me just touch on that real quick, Ed. So with the new SBR that we just did the clean water testing to prove how water flows through it and that it's working. Right now, we can treat all the flows that we're going to see coming to the plant as well as the flows from the T-ticket sewers in 2 SBRs. But if anything goes down in an SBR or that needs to be taken down to be cleaned, we don't have enough reserve capacity to reliably make 3. So we're set up to have treatment capacity for a while. As the flows go up, and I don't have the magic number in my head, but probably someplace around 1.7 million gallons a day. We're currently doing 771,000 on average at the treatment plant. So as the watershed plan comes out, and as people talk about maybe expanding the sewer area, that'll help to start setting a timeline for when we need to put the next SBR up at the plant. And the design work and the construction they have is laid out for a 4th SBR. 3 SBRs will give us a lot of treatment capacity. A fourth would be the reserve in case one of them had to go down
Now,
and be
we
fixed.
currently have 2, and we're adding a third, or we just added the third?
We currently have 2. We've been constructing a third one for
Right,
the
okay.
last period of time.
So it's not finished.
And we're at the clean water testing, meaning the tanks are done, and you can see how things flow through and work their way through. But we're not treating anything yet.
Now, the timing's great, because that's a funded, being constructed project, and that will help to ensure that. One other minor point that I noticed in perusing this 70-odd pages is they talked about ensuring that we're not impacting historic sample trawler dragging,
We're fine.
sampling routes, and I'm like, okay, I know trawlers commercially are harvesting along that route, and I've seen them.
It's not an issue.
Yeah, I didn't think it was. I found it kind of interesting that somebody said, yeah, and here, and they showed some maps.
So I don't know whether it's the fisheries, but somebody in the spring does trawls to capture things, to measure
Yeah, what's there?
organisms in the area. And we have a map of where they trawl, they're historical trawling lines, and we are clear of that.
Yes.
Okay, but I think they were looking, I didn't put everything in there. I think that one is a fairly straightforward when we say.
Easy to
this is what we
answer,
have,
but-
da-da-da, we're X feet or whatever off of those lines.
Yeah.
And we project no impact.
Yeah, stay at those lines, you'll be okay. I do see sometimes some of those commercial trawlers going on the inland side of the harbor marking buoy, which is pretty much near the edge of the eelgrass. So it's like, you guys are really messing things up out there already. So I would think we're going to have kind of a marked exclusion zone
There will be.
over the
There will be.
diffuser. So, those are good questions, but that was one point that was raised that I said, boy, they're really kind of stretching, but okay, easy to answer.
I'm going to jump to Jonathan.
Yep, done.
So it seems like some of the questions that have been raised rely on having a good understanding of the final targeted watershed management plan. What is the timing of answering these questions relative to the completion, of that, the plan by the consultants? So they need to be pretty close together so we have the timeline, not negatively impacted?
Yeah, it's just, we are not obligated to put the draft environmental impact report in within 60 days or 90 days. We're going to come back in response to the Secretary's certificate and outline our approach and a timetable. I have not seen that yet, but obviously we're going to town meeting to get money to, get going on the watershed plans. And I would say 6 or 8 months from now, we'll probably have a much better picture of where we're going to on some of this stuff. Definitive enough to put it into the draft EIR. Yeah, there's two paths that we're on right now, and they need to merge into one path.
So you're done? Steve, where they talk about concerns about spills and leaks from the proposed infrastructure,
Yep.
are they talking about only the new infrastructure, or are they talking about the whole package?
That's a great question. I would say a minute ago, I just talked about adding a third SBR to minimize, to give us reliability and redundancy.
So you're going to go all the way up to the beginning?
Yeah, because otherwise someone will come back with another question. So
Right, that's what I just trying to, the way it was phrased, I wasn't sure whether they just wanted to look at the downhill stuff or everything at the top of the heap.
I mean, this is a case of, are you using concrete pipe? Are you using ductile iron pipe? Are you using HDP pipe? Or, what type of pipes are you using? There's a couple of places on the route where we actually have to cut under culverts and whatnot. I will tell, what's the Italian restaurant? Is it Vine? Is it right by where we get our ice cream in the summer, the Dairy Queen? There's a culvert there under that road. And a few years back, when we put the water main in that location, we actually used galvanized pipe because it's below elevation where there's probably regular intrusion of seawater during high tides and whatnot, and we wanted to, make sure that it was going to, not corrode and rot. So that's the sort of thing that we need to advance the overall design concepts on. Be fairly specific that we will do this, we will do that.
Good.
Steve, you had your hand up.
So is this unexpected in the timeline of the outfall?
No, this is all factored into our timeline, that we knew this step would occur.
And who, I mean, it looks to me as though you can, answering most of these is fairly straightforward. Who does it? You and Amy and Kristen, or a contractor?
GHD is contracted as our engineer on this, so they prepared the ENF, they will prepare the draft EIR. I'm sure John and I have, once a month for the last year, sat in on monthly progress meetings on the Outfall. And those have gone pretty smoothly, pretty comprehensive. Would you say, John?
They've gone very well.
So, yeah. I brought this up to kind of frame for this board and anybody listening. We have more work to do. It's going to cost money to get some of it done. We got to still do some on-water monitoring. I didn't bring up the part that says we have to develop a plan to measure water quality at the diffuser site for a number of years going forward, because it's not necessarily controversial, but I tried to pick and choose things that, at least to me, are things I want to make sure that people understand, so they know why we're spending money and that we're spending it wisely. Comments from the audience?
Great job.
Well, I would say I've gone through in my career some of this stuff a few times, and the entire team, GHD, Amy, the people from the state lined up early on, and understanding what they would be curious about. Everybody has worked almost from day one to understand that for Falmouth, with all of our estuaries, that the outfall is what will really help us to get to where we need to get to. So rather than throwing up roadblocks, they've sort of been like, well, this is what we are concerned about, so make sure you look at that. Like we looked at the impact on the Sagamore lens. There were several comments in here about that report, but none of them were like, you need to do another analysis, or you need to do more analysis, so. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. Making myself a note so I don't forget that Kim asked me to do something. The next item on the agenda is, as this board knows, we applied for a grant for the Snug Harbor PRB. The grant got awarded. The town has some obligation to provide a level of in-kind service. If we want to make sure that we're not at the end of a project in a couple of years and saying, oh, we're supposed to have 10% and we only have 8%, it behooves us, not when we talk about it at this board, but if anybody like Ed or Ken or Kristen works on it, or the town council has to look at something and provide an opinion, we need to keep track of hours spent. The DPW has indicated they'll provide a certain level of equipment and labor for the project. But Ed, if you would be willing, I would like to ask you to sort of set up a bookkeeping system, and we'll routinely remind people that, if they do a half an hour or an hour, collect it, okay?
Yeah, accumulate your time investments, whether, I've personally been using 15-minute increment minimum.
Well, you sound like a lawyer.
I am. I've learned to dislike them over long enough times I became one. But, I think it's simple enough, and, I got a lot of scattered notes of, 15 minutes on the phone with XYZ and neighbors and what have you. So, yeah, I can be the central repository.
If you go over to the West Falmouth Association and give a presentation, keep track of it.
I've had half-hour conversations with them on the phone. So that's all accumulated time, and if 15-minute increments, and just jot them down, and I can total them up and submit it as part of our financial part.
Kristen, at some point, whatever the bookkeeping on that is required from the grant, just let Ed know about it.
Yep.
So we collect it the way it needs to be done. Okay. All right. I don't know if this is considered strategic planning or what it's considered, but at the last board meeting, I pointed out that we're at a point with this committee where it's probably good to try to define what our role is. And I'll preface that by pointing out that, you know, the DPW through the sewer department, they're the people that are contracting for engineering on the outfall. They're the folks that are contracting for the construction of sewers. They're the folks that are contracting. And now we have, over the last year or so ago, IAs are now with Mass Tech. So I enjoy coming here. I enjoy talking about things. I thought it'd be good to find out what people on this committee think are key things that we need to be working on. I might give John the opportunity to go first, because Kim and John and I sat down to talk about some things having to do with a webinar for the Pond Coalition, and John was very clear on there's two elephants in the room, one pygmy and one gray.
So I had two things that I think we need to work on. One is equitable contribution of IAs in the watersheds, comparable to the town contribution that we make to sewers. In other words, we've got to figure out some way that if we mandate 5,000 IAs of one type or another, that the town is chipping in for their implementation, whether that's buying the hardware for the IAs or whatever. But I think that's just for us to be successful, we've got to figure out a way. And my understanding at the moment, that's not currently in the 10-year capital plan at the moment. The other thing that I think is absolutely critical is the development of a successful model for responsible management entities. The Mass Tech has had $1 million grant to do that. We developed a management plan, 5 years or 6 years ago, when we developed the CWMP for Oyster Pond. And we sat down and discussed that plan with Brian Dudley any number of times over coffee. We never could get DEP to commit. So the real problem is that in order to monitor these, if we have 5,000 IAs, and we have to monitor those and report to DEP, we can't afford to do it at the rate that DEP mandates now quarterly. And we developed a scheme, a reduced monitoring scheme to be able to do that. We never could get DEP to respond to that. And my understanding is that Mass Tech has not gotten DEP to respond to that. And so I think we have to go to people like Z. Crocker, the other towns on the Cape, and to our delegates to Boston, to get them to intervene at DEP and get them at the table to sit down and really work through this to get a successful management scheme. So I don't think it's a town problem, but I think it's incumbent on us, because Mass Tech has not successfully managed this, that we figure out a scheme how to move it up and apply pressure at Boston to get some sort of a reaction from them.
Who or what in the town would take responsibility? I mean, would we contract this out to Mass Tech? Would this be under the Board of Health? That's something we need to probably talk about, John, right?
I think it's largely political at this stage. Mass Tech has had a contract. We developed a perfectly viable management entity scheme. DEP has simply not managed to come to the table and discuss it reasonably. And I don't believe we can be successful with our watershed plans if we don't have a way of being reasonably able to report to DEP annually.
Thank you, John. We got written suggestions from two of the board members You guys want to do rock, paper, scissors and figure out who goes first?
Hi, Doug Brown, Select
Hi,
Board.
Doug.
Just wanted to quickly say that, whenever you run into a roadblock like that, I guess that's time for you guys to send another letter to the Select Board and say, here's the problem that we have. We need some help to move it forward, and then the Select Board would likely take it up. And I guess what we could do is then send letters to our delegation and say that we need help and copy it to DEP, and it, rises to the next level. And then if we don't get a response from that, then we get the legislators to send their own letters. I guess that would be the process.
So I sort of wrote down I'm taking little notes here, John. I think what we should do is we should find what you did before, resurface it so everybody on this board sees what was done before, and then we can have an agenda item specifically on that. And then
I
try to-
can
try
send
to
the
move it.
model we developed for Oyster Pond to Kirsten, and she can distribute it.
Perfect. You got that for agenda item going forward? Gentlemen? They gave written comments. I'm going to allow the written comment folks to jump in next. Unless you want to talk about management entities.
Are you looking at me or John?
You.
I see a couple other key points, and it really, I think, goes back to issues with somehow defossilizing the DEP. One is we're focusing our effort on numbers that are 20 years old. Best guesses when groundwater inputs of nitrogen, groundwater flows, attenuation, and everything, I believe, date from 2006. What would it cost to sit down and literally remodel these flows, the concentrations, what exactly we're having to deal with? And at the same time, Ken brought this up a couple of weeks ago, we need to switch from dealing with concentrations to dealing with mass balances, because that is where, not to be cute, where the rubber meets the road. Exactly how much nitrogen is there, not what is the concentration, because once we start looking at reduced flow, plumbing fixtures, and urine diversion, the old models don't work. The actual concentrations are going to go up because you've got the same amount of nitrogen, presumably, going into a smaller amount of water. So suddenly, when you're doing your monitoring and looking at your efficiencies of your septic system and what the concentrations are on the effluent in the septic systems, it's all messed up. And so I would like to see us somehow get some kind of cogent statement for supporting both new modeling and new modeling that involves mass balances. 'Cause, I mean, it's just, it's so basic, because once we start messing with other sorts of changing the amount of water flow in the system, concentrations have got to go up. Almost, I can't say they got to go up, but they're most likely to go up. And then you say, oh my gosh, we failed. Well, we haven't failed. We're just dealing with a different situation that we didn't anticipate. And other than that, a lot of things are on here, common things about outreach and public education. And also, we kind of have the luxury of doing big picture, long-term thinking, and just develop some thought models about what if X happened to Falmouth over the next 10 or 15 years. You know, what is it? Is there a black swan event that may suddenly change the wastewater situation in Falmouth, or whatever it might be? And I won't get going on my ideas of what I thought COVID did to parts of Falmouth, because suddenly you had bunches of people year-round in parts of Falmouth that didn't have year-round public, but I'll stop there.
Steve, could I just make one comment? Regarding mass balance and the new model, towns early on decided they would sue DEP about that model. DEP absolutely refused to entertain that. As far as going by mass balance, which is clearly the right way to do this, George Hoyfelder, who's been head of Mass Tech for years, has fought with DEP about that, and has gotten nowhere. I'm not sure that's a battle we want to take again.
I agree absolutely with both Tom and John. What Tom said is technically absolutely true, but the elephant in that room is DEP.
Yes.
And it's an elephant that won't move.
Right.
And the first step before you paid for modeling would be to establish from DEP that they would accept such a model.
Right.
And figure out that the whole thing could be done such that the 20-year goal could still be met. Otherwise, it's pointless.
Yep. No, I agree. We need to get them to move on this, and as we've seen.
Because appealing to them, although it's distasteful, it's sort of free. Whereas the modeling, you have to start paying real money.
Well, I was hoping they would pay for the modeling, not us.
Even better, more reason to go to them first.
Steve?
I know that's a pipe dream, but, but it's just crazy. I mean, I'll stop.
Careful what you ask for too, right? It can only just get worse for us.
It's possible it could make it worse for us, but I don't think so.
I mean, I always say, you know, the MEP has got these TMDL things in them. They're numbers that I don't disagree that the model was either incomplete or, you know, not, you know, using the right data, and things are different. But I always say at the end of the day, it's whether or not the biology comes back, okay?
Right.
And so, again, we look at Little Pond once in a while, and at least on paper, if we follow the rules, we did not sewer enough of the Mara Vista Peninsula to be able to get biology to come back in there, based upon the model and the numbers. But yet, we get anecdotal information, we get the data, and we can see that the pond's getting better, it's getting cleaner, you know. So the question would be how to, the level of effort or calibration required to get DEP to understand that we don't have to turn around and say we're going to put in 800 sewers and 800 IAs for this watershed, but we're going to put in 700 sewers and 300 IAs, and that we believe will make what we need to make there. One of the things that I've been struggling with in the watershed plans is you put these targets in and then you're measuring every 5 years. What you're measuring is the number of facilities you put in, the number of sewers or the IAs. And I haven't gotten far enough in anybody else's watershed plans to know whether or not you can say, our goal is to get this done by this date, and then be able to look and see in 5 or 6 years, because it doesn't happen overnight. You know, you put this in, as we saw in Little Pond, you don't put this stuff in, and the next year, there's an improvement. It takes some time to see it, okay?
A couple of things. I think what I'm hearing, if I'm understanding you correct, Tom, is you're basically saying we need Mass Estuaries Project version 2.0.
Exactly.
And that is a state DEP responsibility. That's their expense, and the mission would be to convince them, hey, this is old stuff. You need to redo it. And I think that's as far as we can go.
Yes.
I certainly under no way would consider the town trying to do it on their own and say, hey, DEP, eat this and take it.
Yeah, no, that's not what I want.
Waste of time. The other just quick point to what John is saying about the SUP, it's interesting, what are other towns doing? And I've asked some months ago, the Mashpee Selectman, who happens to be the chair right now, and she queried the Board of Health agent, what are we doing about monitoring performance? And very simply, the operator of the system, whoever's the licensee, the licensed operator, is required to send the samples to MassTech, the county, and Mashpee's done. They have nothing to do. They're not accumulating the data. They're not monitoring it. The onus is on the homeowner's engineer or the company to put the thing in, and the county. That's their sup. Period, done. They're not trying to monitor the hundreds that they're putting in or have mandated, and, most of the town has to do an IA if they're not in the sewer zone. And it's going to be interesting, and I think important on a lot of things as we go forward. What are the other towns doing? The whole Cape and the islands, how are they responding to this? What is the reaction they're getting from DEP? So that's all on that, unless we want to start going through the lists that are up there.
One comment on what Ed just said. I think we want to be really careful. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with saying the responsibility is the homeowner and their engineer, or like Nitrex or Nitro-E.
Yep.
But you better make sure before the homeowner or anyone else signs the contract that that supplier agrees to that. They may say, oh, well, if you want us to do that, that's another $5,000 per year. I made up that number. I have no idea what it would be.
If you go dig into the Board of Health current regulations for IAs, I think they've covered a bunch of that. The Board of Health will tell a homeowner that's got to put an IA in, does your engineer understand that your system has to work? Does your provider of the system understand that it has to work? And if it doesn't work, the onus is on you to take it out and put in one that does work.
Yeah, I'm just saying, in doing that, you want to make sure that it reflects back to the prices that are going to be charged.
Okay, fair enough, right?
And
Go ahead.
that's all.
Jonathan's going to jump in here.
I just think it's important that we do have some sort of centralized management integration, because if a lot of these systems are underperforming and not everybody's aware of it, then the chance of the project being successful decreases. So I think there should be somebody who's looking at all this data for an area of one of these targeted watershed management plans, and is gauging how successful things are. Because if everybody's underperforming and they're getting 20 milligrams per liter instead of 3, or whatever the number is, then I think that's a major problem that we don't want to wait for X amount of years to recognize it. I think we need to be integrating all the results together at some frequent interval. I don't know if that's the SUP or who does that, and understand whether we're on the path to success or failure before it's too late.
Agree?
Will we go through our lists?
Please.
Because I think we're getting into detailing items that are up there or in somebody's mind, rather than just, okay, here's things that are
You
important. And I
want to
think
put Ed's list up?
it is. Now, this was my attempt to, I had actually prepped this for the last meeting, and we kind of deferred it to this one, but important issues that have been part of this committee the 2 years I've been on it, and I think need to be continued going forward. And, I view a primary mission of the committee is outreach and public education and support of any of the wastewater-related initiatives. And so Outfall's the biggie right now. We've talked about it extensively already this evening, and that process is moving. But an important part of our mission in it, as I see it, is to make sure the public is aware and accepts and has any questions they have about this project answered prior to it going to town meeting for full funding and to the general electorate, and also to address concerns and questions that, areas, residents in the immediate area, Falmouth Heights, off of Kite Park, people along the pipeline route, to understand the project, and if they've got some fear or issue, that we address it proactively, and to determine how are we going to do that outreach and education and actually implement it, I think is a key goal. IA triggers, the Board of Health has passed recently their regulation that goes into effect, I believe, in just a couple of days on the 15th. For all new construction, flow increase, thou shalt install an IA. Estimated to impact roughly 100
I'm going to suggest something here.
Yes.
You've got this is a great list. So let's stay with the first one. Does anybody have any concerns or comments with us continuing to be engaged in outfall outreach and education?
I mean, they're all good things, and the list is similar to mine and probably everybody else's. The real question is how you arrange them in order of priority.
That's fine, we can come back to making the priority list. Okay, because I just don't want to have somebody
Yep.
have something.
Build up too many questions.
I would just say that public outreach is for all this. It's not just IAs. It encompasses, I think, everything that we're trying to do, or not just Outfall. It's all these different elements. It's having some sort of master plan to, reach out to the community to make sure that they understand what's happening, why it's happening, and the successes that we have, like little ponds, so they understand the money's going for something useful.
That it's working. And, there's been comments made at some of our meetings by members of the audience, the sewers don't work. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't work? Give me some evidence. But, we need to address those questions, concerns, and correct any misinformation. And you'll see, it's a common theme of outreach, outreach, outreach. I think part of the whole thing, because it is a general part of our mission, as I see it, what is the methodology for the outreach? Katie and her wonderful articles to have a mini enterprise is a good start. Not everybody reads it. Fewer still, I think, understand it, although she does a great job of, I think, trying to explain and bring it to the points without a lot of extra words. But yeah, IA triggers, there's the first one has been implemented. There are roughly between 200 and 300 in town, depending on how you count and whose numbers you believe. And this will be another 100. I talked extensively to Clean2, who does the nitro systems this week, basically their marketing and administration person, and they are determined and feel they are going to get a 10 or 11 part per million of nitrogen general use approval in the near term, hopefully by year end, but certainly soon thereafter. I don't see the data supporting that, and I've asked the questions of them, MassTech, and I've also got a call into DEP Southwest Regional Wastewater folks. Tell me about the numbers and how you're going to calculate these things. Waiting for a response. But now, what are the next triggers going to be? Is it going to be transfer of title? Is it going to be a time trigger? Is it going to be some combination thereof? The important first decree has been sent down with a lot of definition of what areas are falling under this. What is a nitrogen-sensitive area and all that. They did a lot of preliminary work. So now that die is cast going forward. It's just, what will that next trigger be? Logical one to me is transfer of ownership. But that's part of, I think, we don't make that decision, but I think it behooves us to discuss, get a consensus of this committee, and suggest and advise the Board of Health that this is what we think, and work with them proactively. Watershed management plans, that's been talked about this evening, but to be aware of it, to help educate people on what it is, why it is, and make our suggestions to those folks putting it together if we have some concerns we feel might be ignored, and then advise, because that's our goal. We're an advisory committee to the Board of Selectmen on the plan. And also DPW, as they're working, because it's their responsibility to develop it. But we work with them, the consultants and whomever. Great Pond Phase 1, let's not forget, we've got bids out, hoping for favorable bids in the near term to start construction early next year and be done by the end of the following year so people can start hooking up at the end of 2027. But a lot of people still don't know that they're going to get sewered. And what are they going to have, a grinder pump or gravity and all that? So I think going to their meetings, their precinct meetings, or their association meetings, and being there to answer their questions and explain things, again, outreach, and continuing to see how the project is proceeding. The initiative that John has really headed up on septic tax credit change to a refundable, to do anything we can to promote that legislative change by outreach to associations and select boards and whoever should comment on it. I think that should be, that's a very, very key one to help relieve the financial burden on people who are going to be required to put that in. And also, that affects people who have to hook up to a sewer that don't have the income to take advantage of that tax credit on their connection cost. Not the betterment, because that's ineligible, but the help that can give is not just for IAs, but also for sewer hookups for people that have a lower income.
Any income if they're a resident.
Well, any taxable income. If you don't pay a state tax,
No, I'm just saying if we could get the change.
Yes.
It applies to anybody that's a resident.
yes, yeah, it
Don't have
helps.
to be low income.
Yes, correct.
it-
But it helps those that are not.
It makes it more fair to everybody.
Yes, and helps that population that I think we're most concerned about, those who are financially stressed with maintaining a house they might have inherited.
You just said it in a certain way that I thought somebody might have heard you and thought it only applied to people of below a certain income level, but it applies to anybody that's a resident.
Yes, yeah, anybody that's a year-round resident of this town. Best available nitrogen reduction technology, real mouthful, and IA performance. That ties in with, some sort of a management and reporting plan, but also what are the systems, where are they in the approval process, and what are their comparative costs? What's the best bang for your dollar to reduce the mass of nitrogen and hit those goals of performance?
I'm going to add something just under item 6. That whole thing is with DEP and the tech center about how systems perform. But coming back to John's thing, like at some point over the next period of time, not like 6 months, but probably the next 2 years, we're going to need to develop a model or an approach for the town to be able, like they did with the grinder pumps, to put an RFP out of some sort and be able to get, bulk purchases to then make them available back to the homeowners. So I would add that into the item 6 there as well.
Yeah.
Okay?
There's a lot of detail to each of these, and I guess the thing I'm trying to emphasize is we got a lot of work ahead of us. There's a lot of things we need to be involved with. The IA performance and best available nitrogen reduction technology, that's the deeper I dig into the performance numbers, the more it becomes a can of worms. MassTech on their reporting on performance bases it on the median performance, and that's how they say, this percentage is meeting the goal. DEP does not use median, they use the mathematical average, and that's much less favorable in the performance. So my question to DEP, hoping somebody will answer my calls, is what are you going to use, when, where, and how? Are you rigidly saying minimum 50 for 3 years, that's the only thing we count, it's only the average, and we're even going to include outliers that obviously got something wrong with them? If they do that, then I don't think anybody's going to meet a very good performance number in any hurry. The best performing in the most systems out there continues to be nitro. They have actually 2 approvals. One is general use, provisional rather, for 19 milligrams. And then they also have best available reduction approval for provisional approval at 11. 2 different numbers. And they're working against both. So they have 2 approvals for putting systems in, which I found pretty interesting. Had not known that until just the past week. Urine diversion, that project has become a town project, and it's a real can of worms. It's got a lot of stuff involved with it. I'll be very interested as things go forward to get an updated report of where is that project. And again, it's for us to understand and be aware of what it is. That is not something that this committee is directly involved with, but it's part of our overall strategy and another tool in the toolbox. PRBs, same thing. We'll keep an eye on the Snug Harbor thing. We watched Shorewood for how many years? 3 years, 4 years now? And but then look, hey, is there other places where this effective but only limited locations are applicable, but is there other places where that can help us? And also, a new one I thought of just the other day is the grant opportunities. We got a grant for $450,000 for the Snug Harbor project, and to be aware of, and Kristen's great at this, what grant opportunities are there that might fit our mission that we ought to go after, and then, who, when, and how does the outreach and try to get that grant, and see if we can get other entities like, the APCC or Buzzards Bay Coalition or some of those organizations to participate in the grant application. So that's what I had as general, and the more I thought about it, the longer the list got. But, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, so. Amen.
Yes.
Want to go up?
Well, if you insist, but I mean, Ed and others have really outlined all the major topics. Some of the wind has been taken out of my sails because this meeting tonight has so far been so good. And my pet peeve that I was trying to make in my written report is that I think in the past, we've spent too much time dabbling in a whole lot of little things to make a caricature of it. Having a speaker come in from some other town saying, well, this is how we get rid of seagull droppings. I mean, that never happened, but I mean, a lot of the things seem to be trivial like that. Whereas the major technologies are IAs and sewers, and we have 5 years to plan it and 20 years to do it. All the other stuff is good, and it's like oysters. They're working fine, but they're really none of our business anymore, other than in the watershed plan, if it's legal, to subtract first the amount that they take out. And the same for the PRB and inlet widening. But these big issues of monitoring IAs and the plan itself, how do we decide where the sewers are going and where the IAs are going to avoid duplication such as I think is inherent in the recent Board of Health plan. But I'm happy to see that everybody seems to be moving in this direction now.
I have one item that fits in with this, but it isn't really covered by some of the stuff. So other communities, so Falmouth adopted a thing that said new construction, the nitrogen sensitive area against our map. We'll put an IA system in. That's as far as we've gone so far, okay? Other communities have turned around and said, any whatever, the different triggers, as you'll call them, and they say 500 feet or 1,000 feet. I think one of them on the vineyard might be 1,500 feet, Kristen?
The one on the vineyard is pretty much in their whole watershed.
The whole watershed.
It's Tisbury.
But where I was going with this is, I think this committee can do some work to help guide the Board of Health on the next thing that's going to have to happen relative to who's got to put an IA in and why. And we've had different people wander in front of this committee at times and talk about attenuation of nitrogen in the ground. Back to the model is flawed. The model makes no accounting for attenuation. But I think that there's some data analysis that this board can work on that would say groundwater's moving at 300 some odd feet a year. There's the time of travel, and I got a hold of Kevin Kroger a number of years back authored a report that specifically looked at the attenuation of nitrogen in the ground, looking at the wastewater plume from Falmouth, and I think it was Red Brook Harbor was the other one for some reason. So he was looking at time of travel and what happens to the nitrogen. I asked Jonathan one day to take a look at the Mara Vista Peninsula, and you bumped into it pretty fast, John. But I think this is a key thing for us to kind of wrap ourselves around and say, okay, yeah, maybe tidal drift, maybe everything else, but put an IA in 12 years travel time up in the nitrogen sensitive zone probably has less real benefit than putting one in within the 1 year or the 2 year zone, okay? And we've had a little bit of that in the background, but that's something I'd like us to try to wrap ourselves around a little bit more and try to start understanding where it makes the most sense to put these in. I don't know where the watershed plan will go with that, but I think you guys talk about fairness a lot, and I agree with you, but we want to push hard to get it where we need to get it to see a benefit of it, not just in a nitrogen-sensitive zone.
Oh, I agree.
Because that 40 or 50 or 60 that may be going in at somebody's septic system, way up the system, might only be 8 or 10 by the time it gets
let me say another part of what I was thinking. You've said that you and Kristen are going to do the watershed plans this summer, right? Kristen is going to do it this summer.
She's on, ScienceWare is part of the team that's going to put together watershed planning, yes. But
That plan-
it's GHD.
I'm assuming a key part of that plan is a map that shows the properties that will be sewered and the properties that will need to have IAs. Is that correct?
It's a reasonable assumption that that is an end product, but the path to that end product could benefit by some.
Oh, absolutely, but when does that end product, is that written down? When is that map inked?
That will be June 14th, 2026.
Okay, that's, all right. I accept the humor of, no, I accept the humor of June 15th.
You're not putting that in minutes.
But saying,
No, hold on, I'm trying to give you an answer. The last thing I saw, Kristen, was people talked about 8 months.
I mean, the talks for the contract is by the end of '26,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's not 2 years.
correct?
And so to draw that map, that map is what everybody wants to see. I've gotten
But
calls.
I know, but until it gets approved by the DEP, it's just a draft.
But it's way beyond where we are now.
Okay.
It's what we want. It's like the outfall. You want an outfall, and then there's this give and take of what you have to do to get one. But the inking the map is what people want to see so they can plan. I've gotten more than one call from people who are saying, when am I going to know which we have to do and when we have to do it? I think that's common sense.
Yeah.
You don't need testimony to that effect.
No.
And that anybody would want to know that. And I think it's the job of this committee, well before that map is inked and before the contractor decides where they're going to draw the line, to decide what criteria and algorithm we want them to use to determine the position of the lines on that map.
You've just circled back to what I just said.
Good.
Which is, go back to the watershed plans. There's a 5-year, this will happen by this 5-year. This will happen by year 10. This will happen by year 15. This will happen by year 20. So I don't think it's one map. I think there's 4 maps for each watershed, okay? And I would say that the time of travel from IAs should help to define, within the first 5 years, this is the push. Within the second 5 years, this is the push. You know, if somebody wants to do it ahead of schedule, great.
But for instance, I think you would agree, you don't want to have people putting in IAs where you're going to come along even 20 years later and put in a sewer.
I don't know. I don't know that I would agree with you on that.
Really, you see, it's acceptable to tell somebody that they have to spend all this money, as you say, burying a new car in their yard, only for it to go to the scrapyard in 20 years.
You just made a hypothesis that somebody puts an IA in that's going to, within a year or 2, be effective because it's close to the water. And then 20 years from now, when the sewer comes by, they have to connect to the sewer, that they shouldn't be put in that position. And I would say, if they're within a certain distance of a water body, they're a primary contributor now, and they should be doing something now. That's me. You asked me if I agree with you. I don't agree with you.
All right, that's maybe not a topic for tonight, but I think it's a major topic for this committee,
Okay.
that whole planning process. And the financial trade-off between the cost per unit for sewer or the cost per unit for IAs, taking into account, for instance, the point you've made, which is one sewer connection does the same nitrogen removal as 2 IAs, roughly.
Yeah, if we get down to, if we get down to the 10.
And taking into account the pricing of sewers and IAs.
Right.
But not just waving our hand, actually putting down numbers and figuring it out.
Again, I brought this attenuation thing up because I think there's a key group of homes near water bodies that probably have a greater impact, and we won't get to put sewers in them for a while. And to me, it's like, well, you've bought a piece of property next to a water body. You should do something to make that water body healthy. And if 20 years later, the town wants to grant you a waiver to not tie to the sewer or anything else, that's fine. But in the 20 years, in that 20 years, we can't just say, oh, well, in 20 years, we're finally going to put sewers out at the top end of Wacoit, and nobody's going to do anything and have an algae bloom every year out there. I'm sorry.
I'll just say one response to that is, I think that if and when the...
That's my opinion. It's not a fact.
Everything everybody's saying is their opinion.
But I'm sure you agree with me.
If and when this fairness between IAs and septic, IAs and sewers is worked out, and there's a substantial subsidy from the town to the IAs, I submit that opinion will move in the direction of, let's not waste the money. Let's not install something only to take it out 20 years later and install another expensive thing that the town now has to pay for. No individual in their life purposely does something knowing that eventually there'll be something else there.
Well,
There are plenty of exceptions. Sure, you move.
People buy boats and do things with them, so that's
Yes.
probably a distinct subset. Jonathan?
I don't think we should try to solve problems here. I thought this is the forum to discuss what are the broad themes that we need to be focusing on in the coming years.
You're right.
And we need to get together.
digress too much.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to get into the woods here, but, I mean, for me, and I have a few of my things under Ed's very comprehensive list, but I'm a grouper, so I have financial support, and I think we need to be looking at ways to help out homeowners to pay for these very expensive systems, which we know are critical to the health of the waterways, but still, for a lot of people, it's a huge expense. And I was listening to one of the Barnstable water quality meetings the other day, and they were spending a huge amount of time looking about what are the various public funding opportunities out there for IA septic systems? How can we get loans for people? And I think we need to take a similar approach. We need to start really focusing on, how we can provide, and if we can provide some sort of financial relief, whether it's through the town, through the state, or federal government, whatever. But for me, that's something that I would like to be involved in, and I'm sure there's others, as part of the fairness. How do we get money to people who need it the most to pay for systems that they never really thought they would have to put in? They're not budgeted for that, but they recognize it's their civic duty, and we need to help them pay for it.
Yep.
The other thing is public outreach. I agree. I think we can do a much better job beyond what's already done with the paper, letting people know what's coming, because I also get questions all the time, are the sewers working? And just the other day, I had to run through the list with Little Pond, but they should all have that information, so in their mind, they know right now that this money is well spent, not is it working? It's, how will it help the ponds that are closest to me or whatever.
Good point.
And the other thing, and I don't know, maybe this is out on a limb, but water quality beyond nutrient reduction, is that at all within our purview? It's a huge issue, potentially. Are there other groups within the town that deal with that specifically?
What do you
Like PFAS or, other things that affect the quality of drinking water? Is that something that we ever are going to talk about, or it's just beyond our scope? I mean, I know a lot of people have filtration systems.
So, the water department measures for PFAS in all the drinking water supplies, and they've got provisions for treating for PFAS in the fresh pond well. And so in terms of drinking water and PFAS, there's a real focus inside the water department already on that.
I'm using it as an example. How many people put filters on their water here? How many people drink out of the tap?
I would hope that just about everybody in town drinks out of the tap. The water is very good quality in Falmouth, and it gets chlorinated, and chlorine is a poison, so you should have a carbon filter on anything that you drink or make ice cubes out of to get rid of the chlorine. But other than that, the water's excellent. Sorry, I ran the water department. But my favorite thing was when the fourth grade class came in, I told them that I was the only person legally allowed to put poison in the drinking water. And, you know, more than once I got a parent later say, "Did you tell my kid that you poisoned the drinking water?" But, you know, I wanted to explain to them, like, you know, years ago, people didn't make it to 50 because their teeth rotted out, you know?
But maybe that's part of the public outreach, because there's a lot of forums, you know, people don't necessarily have the same opinion. It's probably not factual, but it's something that we should, as the Water Quality Management Committee, be able to then make a strong statement that, you know, hey, this is not an issue.
Yep. Doug's going to set us straight.
I'm just going to offer my own suggestion. You know, when I was driving down here, I was thinking, you guys have really got this all under control, and most of your work is behind you, and now you've outlined, obviously, there's so much more yet to be done, you know, still on the same path that you're going. But my thought was that, I remember a few years ago when there was some questions about freshwater ponds, and it was clear that it was outside of your purview. And I'm hoping that you might reconsider that and maybe come up with a new mission statement that says that, you know, in addition to following through with the public outreach and the informational stuff, you might consider taking on that freshwater aspect and start to say, you know, maybe you could be the technical support to these pond groups that are forming, like the pond committee, and, you know, all the stuff that we're starting to have these initiatives on, because I know there's a need for that. Because, you know, they can only do so much with their technical expertise, and you guys have the real experience with Kristen, and you can make recommendations for expenditures by the select board, so.
That's a great honor, but how do you reconcile that with the fact that the select board very recently created the Fresh Pond Committee, and it has eminent experts like George Hoyfelder on it?
Well, maybe it's not needed. It was just
I mean,
my...
if nothing else, you'd have to draw the line so that we weren't fighting with it.
Yeah, well, that's true. It's a good point.
We have somebody on this board is
Yes.
covering it.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
Kim and I communicate fairly regularly. We met the other day because he's asked me to participate in a webinar to explain what we're doing. And we will continue to talk. I think...
Maybe Stephen makes a good point that now that the committee's in place,
No, but
maybe it's double.
part of his position, Doug, was, you know, we are so focused on the estuaries, and there's models of what we're going to do and everything, and they're still trying to figure out a lot about ponds and whether what they might need to do or might not want to do. And so they're a little bit behind in understanding what they've got in front of them. I attended last Saturday the Brewster Pond Coalition folks. You know, they're a couple of years ahead of where they are, but I believe we have been supportive and will continue to be supportive of the pond thing, but they have, you know, they're focused on things like phosphorus a little bit more. And whatnot. So,
As they should be.
They should be, but I don't want to take it away from them.
No, I agree.
Maybe I wrote a little note here to, you know, have it be more clear of our interactions.
Right.
And where we can support them.
Okay, thanks. I got to go to a precinct meeting, so thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
You go to the rec center?
No, East Falmouth School.
I don't fit into those seats. I doubt that you do.
I don't either. It's kind of funny.
Okay. I think I'm going to move this conversation on unless we got
Just one point I think I understood what Mr. Layton was saying. A pretty important point on the watershed plan that's being prepared by the designated group of science wares and GHD and DPW, that I think he was saying, at what point does this committee have any chance to look at that map or maps and say, hey, this looks pretty good, or hey, why aren't you planning to sewer over here, you know, to look at the specifics of where they're saying this will be eventually sewered, or we're suggesting it will be sewered. But I would like to think this committee would have a chance to see that before it's stamped and submitted.
We will.
Thank you, Ed. That is
We will.
precisely
I would say,
the point.
much like John and I have on a monthly basis been participating in outfall planning, okay? I'm certain that myself and somebody else, or a couple of people from this committee, will sit in, there'll be a monthly status of where they're at, what they're doing. They're not going to work for 9 or 10 months and then say, ta-da.
Yeah.
So,
Take it and like it. Yeah, I think it's important.
no, they've not been doing it in a closed way, so.
You know, I had the feeling that when, and I argued pretty vehemently with Eric and Virginia back when they were heading up the Little Pond Sewer Service area, that you're going too far in contradiction to the Mass Estuary project on the Heights. You know, sewered houses that are right on the beach, and unless gravity is suspended, it isn't flowing backwards up the hill, and not far enough in other areas. And as I get more and more acquainted with the issues and how things kind of are working and not working, I can see parts of the Heights that probably should have been sewered midway up Little Pond, but didn't. But if you look at the topography, gosh dang, that stuff's got to be flowing because the groundwater kind of swales into a long, like almost a mile-long trough right into what's the most impacted parts of Little Pond, where you see Phragmites growing and things like that. So there's freshwater input to a large extent. So I think for this committee, with whatever experience and brain power we might bring to the table, to see it as it's being developed, not after developed. I think that's what you were saying, and I hope it was.
I'm saying even before it is. Let me make an analogy. If you have a lot and you want to hire an architect to design a custom house on it for you, you don't just call up an architect and say, hey, Joe, could you design me a house? Great. Let me know, send me the bill and send me the plan.
Yeah.
That's absurd. You tell them about how much you have to spend, what features you want. You want a big house, a little house, and you work with them. And in this case, it's our job, it seems to me, to specify the method they use to decide between, what if they come all back with sewers?
Do you want to take a first crack at specifying what methodology they should use to make the watershed plan?
I think if you want me to, I think you'd do a much better job.
Well, maybe I'm serious. I'm serious. If you want to do this, we can bring it up at a meeting and say, when they're going out to contract, we want to know if you've considered this.
I'm saying that who is the purchasing department? Who is the purchasing agent for this contract? Is it Amy? Is it DPW?
The contract will come out of the contract will come out of the DPW, the scope of work.
The scope of work. Who writes the scope of work?
Have you read the watershed plan? There's state regulation says a watershed plan shall include the following.
Okay, and none of it is specified by the town?
The town takes that document, and then they add information like, things that we know about parts of the town. But GHD and ScienceWare are very aware of everything in this town. The issue is that the plan has to do this. It has to look at build-out. It has to look at this. It has to look at that. Like I was just reading stuff off the draft EIR. If you go to the documents defining watershed planning, it's not down to the last minutia, but it pretty much says you need to do this. You need to have this. You need to have things like financial implications.
Does it say anything about how you decide between IAs and sewers?
No, that's a town decision.
That's a town decision, right? Don't you have to know prices for both of those components to make a rational choice?
I'm going to have, so.
All I'm saying, we're getting down in the weeds again.
I want to stick it because you're very concerned that there might be something that's not getting done. You should put that list together and we can check off with it or whatever. So for example, Kristen came in one day and she said, I am looking, basically the contingency plan, and I'm using the following methodology to look at where sewers and/or IAs would have to go. All right?
Perfect. That should be presented to us.
We've already had it presented to us, Steve. She presented it once before. You want to go back and revisit that?
No, I remember those presentations. They were good. And there was a map.
And so those are the underlying criteria that they're using going forward.
Then I'm taking up too much time on details. You and I can talk about this offline.
Yeah, I'll ask Amy if she's got a draft scope of work, and I'll get a copy of it.
Okay. Thank you.
So you're more of a skeptic than I am. You think that they're going to come up with some way to, to find where sewers and IAs goes that is somehow or other, not equitable or not based on science.
Well, I think it's a possibility that anybody can
Possibility
make
rocket lands
mistakes.
in this building in the next 10 minutes.
Everybody sees mistakes everywhere. It's the job, if you're going to have multiple entities, for them to check on each other.
Okay, can we move on to the next item on the agenda?
Maybe anybody in the audience want to ask anything?
Oh, yeah. Please, just step up to the lectern.
I'm Richard Hale, live at Treetops, 42 Landfall.
Yeah.
So I haven't been to one of these meetings. I think, I was trying to find last time I was here, but I think it was 2019. And I'm both happy to hear this committee is still focusing on fairness, and unhappy to hear that it sounds like zero progress has been made with the town. And I sort of have this feeling the town is willfully ignoring the problem. That may not be true, but I feel that way. I think it'll become a political issue at some point when people figure out, the cost discrepancy between whether you're mandated to have a sewer or mandated to have an IA. But you guys are on it, which is good, so I'll leave it at that. But other concerns, coming back into this many years later, you just were mentioning that the homeowner has a responsibility for these systems when they're installed, along with their engineer. And Steve, I'm frankly less worried about putting in an IA for a lot of money and then 20 years later connecting to the sewer. I'm more worried about putting in an IA that fails, $60,000, and being responsible for putting in another IA for $60,000. It doesn't sound like these things are operating, at the level of efficiency that, is expected. And that apparently hasn't changed. And my last comment simply is, I agree with the concept that you put the IAs where they'll have the most benefit, but I do think you want to be careful not to characterize homeowners as sort of perpetrators. People who buy near the water certainly can impact the water quality sooner than somebody who's 12 miles away or whatever. But they have always followed whatever the town mandated, and the fact they live close to the water is just, chance.
I apologize if it came across like that.
Yeah, I just, because part of the outreach and stuff is going to be very important. And that's pretty much it. I know none of this is new to you guys, but I don't know. I just feel like several years on, we are no closer to figuring out how, what we're going to have to do and what it's going to cost and what happens then. All right, thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Moving on to the agenda. Reports of members and staff. Tom.
I do want to spend just a couple minutes on a project where the Freshwater Ponds Advisory Committee is moving forward. And that's an issue partly of enforcing existing regulations. And of course, the first thing they followed up on in one of their very, very early meetings was calling Marine and Environmental Services staff into the meeting to find out how the nitrogen bylaw was faring. And apparently, I forget what year that was passed, it was a lot of hoopla, and there's never been a single enforcement issue that...
Fertilizer?
Yeah, the fertilizer.
That's what I thought you were talking about.
Bylaw, and one of the things they've working on, although it's not ready for showtime yet, is to change the wording of that and make it nitrogen and phosphorus controlling. And in the research they and I have been doing since then, it turns out in 2012, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts passed some very restrictive regulations regarding phosphorus, specifically phosphorus. And phosphorus, and I'll just cite direct quotes from the regulation, phosphorus-containing fertilizer is restricted to when a soil test shows that it's needed, or for the first year of establishing new lawns and turf. After that, you're not supposed to use it unless a soil test shows it's needed. There's other application rules, frozen land and water bodies and things like that. All applications must not exceed the annual recommended rate established by the University of Massachusetts guidelines. And the one they're pursuing right now is the retailer requirements. Retailers must display phosphorus-containing fertilizers separately and post a sign explaining the restrictions on their use. And it literally calls out that the sign must be at least 17 by 11 inches in dimension. And I don't want to read all the wording. It's about 2 paragraphs of wording, but it explains the issue with phosphorus and the fact that they're very strict.
This is in the state law?
This is in the state law,
Okay.
and from the acts of 2012. So what they're doing now is going in at the retailer end and asking the town of Falmouth to ask retailers to follow the display regulations and post a sign advising consumers about the use of these products, and also recommend that retailers be encouraged to advise customers to use soil test kits to evaluate their soil. And it's once every 2 years is what the regulations actually say. So they're taking sort of the soft approach right now and asking the select board to follow through on officially advising retailers what the display rules are. So it's a pretty interesting approach, I think. So we're going to be refining the final word. I've got the recommendations with me now really close. A meeting next Wednesday, the 19th, to come up with a final wording of this and then to present it to the board. I will say that right now, Doug's idea that somehow we would come in and sort of, quote, help them with their stuff, they certainly welcome our advice and all, but it was a major part of our push to have an official committee set up that was separate for fresh water. So I don't think we, that's just my
You've been good communication. Obviously, you're bringing this back and
Yeah.
to committee reports.
So anyway, that's the gist of my report right now, but if anybody has any questions or ideas or things about that, and Katie, all of that I think will come out later. You don't need to rehash that now. I'm sure a week from now they'll have something to put in front of you, or whoever's going to cover that.
Could be me.
Ed?
Yeah, one thing that might make sense for that committee to look at and talk to and maybe get a presentation, I think it was, what's his name, Chris Neal, I think maybe?
Yeah, Chris has been...
He writes some op-ed stuff now and then.
Right.
And I remember somewhere past year or two, something he had in the Enterprise about the relationship between nitrogen and phosphorus in
Right.
fresh water. And the way I understood it, one doesn't work without the other. You need the two combined elements to really screw up the water, to put it scientifically.
Right.
And if you remove one, the impact, if you remove a lot of the nitrogen,
Yeah.
you're not going to have to worry so much about the phosphorus. It might be good for him to address and discuss that with the committee, or maybe he's on the committee. I don't know, but I think that seems to tie in with that thing. The other thing I've noticed in the websites of the two best performing nitrogen reduction, which is the Nitro and the Nitrex, they both claim that they can make their systems remove phosphorus too.
Yes, I've seen some...
Okay, tell me how and how much.
Yeah, for a price.
They say it, but I don't think they're doing it. And
Right.
But it might be worthwhile having them explain that to that committee.
Yeah.
because the phosphorus concern
Yeah,
is too
there's
great.
such
So-
totally
That's all.
different materials in the environment.
Yep.
And in terms of the way they behave and everything.
So I'm looking at the clock. We have 9 minutes to wrap everything up. If there are other committee reports that are of substance, and I thought I would get you to say something.
The National Estuaries Program funding call is open. That's the funding agency. We just got the money from Snug Harbor. So it's nationally competitive, but letters of interest are due next Friday if anyone has a project they think would be a great fit.
Yeah, and how do we get the pond analyzers, the zones?
That was through regional. That
That
was
was the
through
regional one,
Southeast.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this pops up every year, so we don't have something in front of us right now. We kind of got a little bit of a full plate with a lot of things, but to the extent something's going on with the pond folks and the other things, or, you know, anything you guys got rattling around, let's not come up to the last week and then try to decide what we want to go get. We could be putting
I
something
think we
together.
are in the last week. You said it's due next week.
I don't think we're going to put anything in, but
No,
I wanted to flag that it's out there, and that during the course of the year, if you say, wouldn't it be good if we could do this to learn this?
Yeah.
You save those ideas.
Yeah,
Okay.
aren't there some grant opportunities that typically come up in the late winter, early spring?
Usually February, March is when the regional, like SNEP comes out.
Yeah. I think for us to be made aware of those timelines and what types of project might be eligible, so people can put on their thinking hats, you know, weeks and months in advance and say, oh, geez, you know, maybe whatever over here, stormwater project or whatever, culvert project, anything. But they seem to come up every year, and hopefully they'll keep getting funded, and it's a great opportunity to do things that the town doesn't have in a capital plan.
Reports of anybody else on any committee? Otherwise, I'm going to move to the next item, to vote minutes of the prior meeting.
Move that they be accepted as written.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further comments about the minutes? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, good. Our next meeting is
December 3rd.
December 3rd.
3rd.
So everybody have a nice Thanksgiving. Okay?
I will not be here for this.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Martin, are you